How's everyone? Welcome to Open Court. So I just finished up my review of the newest head Auxetic Radical Pro. That review is up on my channel now. And I thought it would be fun to go back and take a look at the very first Radical that I ever used. This was my racket that I used all 4 years in high school, and it was made famous by one of my favorite players of all time, Andre Agassi. Today, let's take a look at the classic head Liquidmetal Radical MP. If you guys like this content, be sure to overhead smash that like and subscribe button to keep the reviews coming. Let's take a look at the Liquidmetal Radical. So the Radical line, as you guys know, has been around for quite a long time. This Liquidmetal Radical series was pioneered by Andre Agassi. Agassi was signed on to head in 1993, and he actually used the Radical 107, the oversized one, and he used that racket to capture 7 of his 8 Grand Slam titles. That's quite a feat. The liquid metal technology was developed by the California Institute of Technology, or Caltech, and it has the atomic structure of a liquid, kind of like mercury, which is what liquid metal basically is. So this Liquidmetal Radical is the successor to the Titanium Radical series, which was very popular and is still used in pro stock form by some pros today. This liquid metal technology claims to provide about 29% more power than the previous Titanium edition. How much titanium or how much liquid metal is actually in this racket, I don't know for sure, but if you guys can see these ridges over here at the 10 and the 2 o'clock positions, as well as down here at the 4 and 8 o'clock positions, these ridges is where the liquid metal technology is supposed to exist in. Whether or not the technology actually works, I don't know, but this was a very popular racket, the Liquidmetal Radical. This is the MP. There was also the Tour, which is the heavier, more advanced version. This is the racket I used all through high school. I strung it with Technifiber biphase full bed at 60 pounds. And even though it's a tight 1820, it didn't hurt my arm at all back in high school, and it provides a lot of power, a lot of pop. I modeled my game after Andre Agassi with his aggressive returns, and that's why to this day I am also an aggressive returner. Now let's take a quick look at the specs of the Liquidmetal Radical MP. This is a 98 square inch, 295 grams or 10.4 ounces unstrung, so it is pretty light. For me, this is a little bit too light, so I've actually added some weight up at the 12 o'clock position here, as well as weight in the throat here and all along down the handle. For most advanced players, I think 10.4 ounces unstrung is a little bit too light, which is why the Tour version exists. It's considerably heavier. Also, it has a 21mm straight beam, so it gets pretty decent control. It is pretty thin, and it has a tight 18x20 string pattern. But because it's so light, it actually swings pretty fast, and it does get a decent amount of spin. But unfortunately, because of its lightness, it doesn't pack a whole lot of punch anymore. So that is why I added so much weight to this racket. So I haven't used this racket in over 10 years, so I'm excited to get back on the court with this, to try this racket for the first time since my high school days. So let's get on the court and let's get into the pros and cons of this classic head Liquidmetal Radical MP. So this Liquidmetal Radical is a very old racket, so the graphite and the material inside might not be what it once was, so I can't claim that this review is going to be spot on, but I'll just talk about what I felt after picking this racket up for the first time in over 15 years. This racket brought back a lot of fond memories, and the feel and touch felt very familiar. A lot of rackets these days have a lot of dampening technology, but this Liquidmetal Radical had that old school firmness and response. I could hit the corners on my aggressive ground strokes and could drop the ball on a dime on my touch shots. Volleys also had some decent pop and pace. What I really liked is that the launch angle is very low, which I prefer because I like to step in and hit returns aggressively, and that low angle kept my returns from flying long past the baseline. The Liquidmetal Radical MP is a very consistent baseline racket, and it has great control on those full aggressive swings. Also, the spin level is quite good for an 18x20 because that lightweight and aerodynamic 21mm beam makes it quite maneuverable. I could get my kick serves to kick high off the bounce and push opponents wide. Topspin ground strokes didn't quite dive inside the lines like a more open string pattern, but it was decent enough to get good control on my forehand ground stroke, which is a little bit more loopy. It flies high over the net, and I would like it to drop down inside the baseline, which this racket did a commendable job of doing. I was actually quite surprised at the flat serves. The flat serves don't have as much pace as when I hit them with a heavier racket, but they were going in at a higher rate. The lightweight made it easier for me to bring the racket over my head and maintain my form for that flat serve, so it was more consistent than I expected. It didn't quite pack that same punch as when I use a heavier racket, but for the most part, I'll trade consistency over power on my flat serves any day. My favorite shots to hit with this Liquidmetal Radical MP were probably the volleys, because the racket was light and maneuverable at the net. Even with the weight modification, I put weight at 12 o'clock in the throat and all down along the handle. It probably increased the weight by about 20 grams, but it was still fairly maneuverable. I could get my racket in position to volley very easily, but the lack of weight also made it a little fluttery whenever I hit out of the sweet spot. I could also hit some low skidding slices and biting underspin volleys by accelerating through the point of contact, which this Radical allowed me to do very easily because of that aerodynamic beam. Overall, this Liquidmetal Radical MP was a fairly easy racket to use, and I see why I gravitated toward it during my high school days. This racket definitely molded my playstyle to what it is now. Now, getting into the cons of the Liquidmetal Radical MP, the biggest downside to having such a light racket is that lack of power and plow through. It also affects the stability, which a lot of players who play at the advanced levels are going to play against harder hitters and would want more stability. I mentioned earlier that the racket gets a little fluttery at the net when I make contact outside the sweet spot, which saps its power. Also, if I was returning a heavy serve and I didn't hit it cleanly, the ball would float and land short, allowing my opponent to take advantage and attack it. I definitely don't like starting points on defense, and if I was ever forced into playing defense, the Radical MP made it difficult to transition from defense back to offense. My only real choice would be to throw up a lob, which is pretty uncharacteristic of me. Also, the net clearance on my slice serves was pretty low, so I ended up clipping the net a lot on my slice serves. I didn't want to risk double faulting, so I rarely ever used the slice serve on my second serve, so it made my serving game a little one-dimensional because I just had to rely on my kick serves mostly. I don't ever hit flat serves on the second, so my slice serves I rarely used on the second serve. Maybe back in high school when I used a full bed of multi-filament, Technofiber biphase even strung at 60 pounds provides some decent pop. The slice serves would have better net clearance with that, but with a full bed of poly, which is what I strung this at, I just couldn't trust that the slice serves would clear the net and land in. And lastly, the grip shape. The grip shape of the older Radicals was very divisive. Some people like it, some people hate it. The grip is shaped like a rectangle, which if you've never felt these old Radicals, it feels very awkward. Playing with the Liquidmetal Radical again after so many years, I can't believe I actually used this racket for 4 years in high school. The grip is definitely not something I can use now, and I'm personally glad that they decided to change the grip to a rounder shape for the modern Radicals, because changing grips from semi-western to continental and back just felt very awkward. Lastly, I don't know if anyone is still going to try this racket, but in case there are still people out there, let's discuss who the Liquidmetal Radical is suited for. This is a very old racket, but it is still a good baseliner's racket because of the control. If you need more power though, I suggest adding weight, as 295 grams unstrung is way too light for most advanced players. I believe this racket can serve as a bridge for an intermediate player looking to take the next step. The weight is low enough to be manageable, but the thin beam and the tight string pattern require a little bit more from the user, so it's similar to a tweener, but the beam and the string pattern is definitely a little bit more on the advanced side. All in all, the Liquidmetal Radical MP still plays well despite its age, and this was a nice walk down memory lane. The Radical line is still going strong, and I'm excited for what the future holds for the Head Radical series.
Oh my God!
Thank you for watching this review of the Head Liquidmetal Radical NP right here on OpenCourt. If you guys like this content, be sure to overhead smash that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you on an OpenCourt.